Hello and welcome to ChooseFI. Today on the show, we have a really interesting story from one of our community members, Chris Travers, who is a New York City public school teacher who actually posted on our Facebook group a couple months ago with this really fascinating post. And it just struck a chord with people. And it was essentially, hey, I figured out money at the age of 26. And now fast forward 10 years later at the age of 36, and I reached $1 million net worth. And of course, as you can imagine, there were a ton of questions. How does a public school teacher do this? How do you do this in such a short period of time? How do you do this living in New York City? Chris's story has a little bit of everything, and I knew that I had to have him on. I think this is one you're really going to enjoy. And with that, welcome to ChooseFI. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really looking forward to this chat.
Thank you for having me. Big fan of the show. Happy to be on.
Nice. Yeah, this should be fun. So, okay, I guess let's start at the beginning, which sounds like it was somewhere in the vicinity of the age of 26. I'm not sure if it was somewhere prior to that, but talk to me about the origin story of Chris figuring out money.
Yeah, so I've always been a good saver. I think I was blessed with that. I always had that saving mentality. No one in my family really knew anything about investing. And at that point in my life, I saved a good amount of money. And I kind of realized I'm losing purchasing power due to inflation. I can't just have this sitting in a savings account. I need to start figuring something out. I had an uncle who was good with money. So my mom at the time said, reach out to him. He could tell you where to invest your money. So I reached out to him and said, hey, I have X amount of money saved. I need to know what to do with it. I'm losing to inflation. He gave me the best advice. And he basically said, if I tell you where to put your money, you're going to learn nothing. So if I just tell you to invest in A, B, and C stock, you'll learn nothing and you'll be back with the same issues. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to give you this link. And I remember this, it was a website. It's not up any longer, but the title of the website was How to Get Rich Slowly. And basically teaching you about broad-based index funds, how to stick to the course. And the best part, there was homework assignments. So there was a book, a reading assignment of a homework assignment you had to read before getting to the next level. And the first book I'll never forget was The Millionaire Next Door. It was the first assignment to read. And I would tell you, I was always a saver, didn't know how to invest. But once I read that book, the light bulb kind of went on. Hey, this is possible. This is feasible. What's next? How do I learn more? And I just got my hands on every book possible and then started going from there.
That's so cool. So, right. So that was called How to Get Rich Slowly, not to be confused with JD Roth's GetRichSlowly.org, which is where I think that was one of my first personal finance, like the forays into the personal finance world. But yeah, similar to you, Millionaire Next Door, it jumped off the page to me. Like it just seems so intuitively and like fundamentally true. It was like the stars aligning, I think. And it's neat to hear that resonated with you. Do you remember any of the other books that were on the homework list or any of the other readings?
I want to say the Rich Dad Poor Dad, the original one, that was definitely on there. Hard to remember off the top of my head. I just distinctly remember Millionaire Next Door, and then the ball got
Yeah.
rolling from there, and just kind of kept reading everything I could.
Nice. Yeah, for me, another one was Smart Couples Finish Rich by David Bach, who doesn't really get enough airtime in the personal finance and certainly in the FI world, but he always put out some just really intelligent stuff. So yeah, it's fun to look back on those formative days. And it's interesting because you and I, it sounds like we were both natural savers, but that only takes you so far, right? Like if you don't have any sense, and I love how your uncle, essentially it was teach a man to fish, right? Like the proverb. And I think he set you on your way.
100%. Yep. That was the best advice because I learned everything on my own.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So we are about 10 years ago, approximately, and you're reading voraciously, you're devouring all this stuff. That's all well and good, right? Because plenty of people take in information, but they don't actually do anything. What were the first couple of steps that you actually took to make your life better?
In terms of investing,
Sure. I mean, investing or yeah, anything. I mean, you're again devouring all this information. Like, where do you go from there?
yeah, at that point, I started reaching out. I just started my first full time job as a teacher at around 26. So that's when I started asking the questions about what should I invest in? What do we have access to here as teachers? Where can we start putting the money away and getting it to work?
That's so cool. So yeah, I think it goes way back to episode 13 with the Millionaire Educator. So we're talking at the beginning of 2017, and it was essentially saying, okay, I think a lot of public servants do these incredible jobs, but what you hear is they're at a financial disadvantage. And I think the counter argument was, oh, but wait, we actually have access to some tools that other people don't. And there might be, I think it was like the unfair advantage of dot, 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 and like teachers or public servants. And I just thought that was such an interesting rethink on it. And I mean, you have done this. I mean, if you wanted to pick hard mode, Chris, you would pick hard mode for most people. I'm a public school teacher in New York City as a single guy. And I'm kind of putting you back in 26-year-old. I mean, that sounds like hard mode, but yet you have thrived. I mean, walk us through this. Like, tell us about the advantages. Tell us what you tell your teacher friends, because I think a lot of people bemoan how difficult it is, but yet you did it the hard way.
So the advantages that the teachers have is obviously the 403B, and everyone knew about that. In New York City, it's called the TDA plan. So they told me right away, put all your money into that as much as you can. Try to max it out each year is the goal. Through my own research and things like that, what they don't tell teachers is you have access to a Roth IRA and probably one of the most important investment accounts. But a teacher wouldn't know that because it's not directly through teaching profession. So that's something you have to open up on your own. So I was able to do that as well. And then through my own research, I was maxing out the TDA, and you get to a point where I want to max out more. I want to do more. Is there anything else I could do? And I'm just learning and trying to fill up all those baskets. And I eventually researched enough and found out about the 457 plan. Boom, we have another access to another account where you could put another, at the time, 22,000 or whatever it was at that time, away. And we just kept building from there.
So tell me about that. So I guess you were informed, or it was at least in the conversation about the 403B or the New York City version of that. But the 457B was not talked about, but yet it's still through the school and or teaching profession.
Yeah, it's not discussed among teachers, and I find the vast majority don't even know they have access to it. I think this is because it's reserved for all New York City employees. So teachers, firefighters, police officers, anyone who's a city employee has access to this account. So since it's not directly like the 403B, the TDA program is directly for the teachers, they don't really know too much about it unless you do your own research about what you have access to in New York City as an employee.
Oh, that is super interesting. Okay. So, yeah, we've just helped a lot of a lot of New York City employees generally, just saying, "Hey, you might not hear about," and it's not just teachers, right? You might not hear about the 457B because it might not be program specific to whatever part of the New York City government, et cetera, that you're involved in, but it sounds like it is available to all New York City employees. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So that's interesting. And now that 457B has the same contribution limits as the 403B. Is that generally how that works?
Yep. And you could argue it's in an even better account than the 403B because you could take your money out penalty free upon separation of service. So if you're not planning on teaching your full 30 years and you want to switch careers at separation of service, you could withdraw all your 457 money penalty free as opposed to the 403B where you cannot.
That is huge. And it's funny because I often forget about that, but now it's seared in my head. So there is a significant advantage to the 457B. Now, you have an option, right? Now, I believe, and I'd love to hear you say, but I believe you max currently both of those out, which is extraordinary. But so fill in the blanks on that. But you are able to pick either one. It's not like you have to max out, because I think some people, again, who aren't aware that they have availability of both just hear about the TDA or 403B, whatever it's called, wherever you are. And they would think, oh, I have to max that out before I can even put into the 457B. So talk to me about both those things.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's not a requirement, and you could easily put 10% in each account, 10% in your 403B and 10% in the 457 if you like. You don't have to max out one to start contributing to the other. And there's pros and cons of each. The 403B plan we have here in New York City is pretty amazing. There's a guaranteed fixed return of 7%. So I don't know many accounts where you get a
Oh, wow.
guaranteed fixed rate of 7% no matter what. So a lot of
Hold on,
teachers
I have
who
to stop you there. So a guaranteed return. So is that like a floor, or is it just, hey, you put your money in the 403B or TDA, you're not actually investing in anything specifically, but they're doing it on your behalf and you get a 7% return? Or is it like, hey, I'm putting into the market in a certain fund? I'm setting up kind of a ridiculous question, but I genuinely don't know what the answer is. How does that work?
Yeah, it's just backed by the TDA where there's a fixed fund. You pick fixed as your investment option, right? You have options for US equity index fund, international equity index fund, or the fixed fund. And at fixed, you're guaranteed currently 7% return on the money. So people who are risk averse, this is, a great option. People who don't want to worry about the ups and downs of the market. And a lot of the older teachers are just very happy to not worry about a thing and have it maxed out and all their retirement in that fixed fund.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I mean, that's an interesting thought experiment for anybody, regardless of how old you are. Is if you could get, so I think in the back of the envelope we use is, okay, maybe an 8% annualized return in the market. And it's just rough. Nobody's guaranteeing anything, obviously. And some years you're up 25%, some years you're down 25%. But on average, 8% is what I use. But man, if you could guarantee me 7%, I don't know. I don't know if I pass that up.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. So that's one of the big advantages of that
Yeah.
403B. Now, the 457 doesn't have an option similar to that.
Gotcha. Okay, that's interesting. All right. So, right, you have access to those things. Now, are there any other accounts that public service workers have access to, or anything else that, like, hey, if you were telling a new colleague, hey, you might not hear about this from HR, or is it really is the main thing that 457B?
Yeah, those two things, the 403B and the 457B, are the two main things that I would tell a new colleague. And I would also, touch on the Roth IRA and doing that separately on your own.
Gotcha. Okay. And now, and I did the cardinal sin of podcasting is I asked you two questions at once before. And so the first question, and I will double back to it, is at 26, when you were starting your job, or 27, whatever it may be, how much money were you putting into those accounts? Like, was this just, hey, you hit full speed, like don't look back from the beginning, maxing these things out, or did you eventually ramp up to that?
Yeah, it's a long story about by the time I was 26, I made sure after I got my first full-time job, I didn't move out of the house right away. I saved. I stayed home. I think that's really good advice. If you have people or you have kids that are going to college, a lot of my friends, the first thing they wanted to do was go into the city and live paycheck to paycheck in an apartment. I always thought, short-term sacrifice, long-term success. Let's just barrel down a couple years because I'm not going to be making a lot of money my first couple of years out of school. Save what you can. And then once I get out of the house, I know I'm not going to have to come back later in life. I know I'm not going to have to be paycheck to paycheck again. So, based on your question, I had a good amount of money saved by the time I figured out it's time to start investing in the 403B. So, I had a cushion where I could just right off the bat start maxing it out and let's keep going from there and see what else I can max out and keep pushing the limits.
Oh wow. Okay, that's very cool. And I love that quote, the short-term sacrifice, long-term success. It reminds me of the one I've mentioned on the show a bunch of times from Jersey Gregorick, which is hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life. And I think, yeah, those are so complementary. And I think that's really important for people to understand. I think a lot of us in the FI community, we've internalized that, but it never hurts to just hear it again, right? Like this is a long-term game. This is truly get rich slowly, like you said. There's no easy, quick answer to this.
Yeah, I saw too many friends that left home too early, paycheck to paycheck, and had to come back home 5 or 6 years later to start saving up to get whatever they needed to do. I knew if I buckled down those 2 or 3 years, saved what I could, and now I hit the ground running and I'm out there maxing out accounts, hustling, doing what I can to keep increasing my net worth.
Yeah, I hear you, man. And it's funny because we are definitely kindred spirits. Because as you probably know, I lived on Long Island most of my life, grew up in a high cost of living area. Obviously, it's not Manhattan, but it's, Long Island's pretty expensive. And yeah, I mean, when I graduated from college, a lot of my friends moved out. And like you said, they didn't exactly explicitly want to live paycheck to paycheck. I know you were kind of that was a little tongue in cheek, but that's the reality. And I think this is part of like FI 101 is there's a finite pot of money, right? And like frugality is important. And I think in the modern FI world, which, ChooseFI has been a large part of shaping the narrative, like a lot of us talk about earning more money, which is wonderful. We talk about being a valuist. We talk about die with zero. But at the heart of it, frugality is really, really important, And that's where it starts. There's a finite amount of money. And when you make 40, 50, 60 grand, which is a great salary to start off, if you go and rent an apartment in Long Island or New York City, that money's going to go real quick. It just is. And yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that propelled me on my way was also like you living at home for a couple of years. And when you save 90% of your income, it's pretty easy to stockpile a big pot of money, right?
Yep, exactly.
That's cool. So, Chris, I guess let's just keep going sequentially. I think people hear school teacher and they hear New York City. And I think the vast majority of people who don't live in New York City or have any sense of salaries or cost of living, I mean, they would think that's almost impossible to save money. But yet you have managed to thrive. I mean, talk me through the concrete steps. Like, okay, you lived at home for a couple of years and you saved money, but that was just for a couple of years. What do you do then? How do you afford to do that? How can you afford to max out retirement vehicles on a school teacher's salary? Like, how is that possible?
Yeah, so the first thing was living at home for a couple of years, saving my income. And then when it was time to move out, my first instinct wasn't to get an apartment by myself. I found a roommate. I found someone I could get along with. I found someone who would split the rent with me. And for Queens, New York, paid about 1,800 a month. So we split $900 a month each at the time. So again, I was still able to save a large amount of my money. Besides being a teacher, I'm a certified athletic trainer. That's what I have my bachelor's degree in. And that's where my passion is as well. And if I'm not teaching, I was basically hustling, doing any kind of sporting event I could provide services for, tournaments on the weekend, football games. If they needed medical coverage, they needed an athletic trainer, I was that person. So I was building my network, I was side hustling and starting to build that business, a side business, active athletic training.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. So during the week, you're a teacher, and then you're also supplementing that on weekends and maybe even nights at sporting events and such as an athletic trainer. So is that something, like you said, networking? Talk me through how significant that, like, how do you break into that in an area where presumably there are a lot of athletic trainers?
Yeah, you would be surprised because I graduated my athletic training program with only about 10 people in my class. So there are not as many board certified athletic trainers as you would think. We
Okay.
get confused with like personal trainers in the gym a lot. Athletic trainers are, healthcare professionals. They're on the sidelines diagnosing injuries for athletes, making sure, first responder, all those kind of things. So it's a kind of a smaller community than you would think. So just by doing these events and tournaments, I'm getting to know coaches, different athletic trainers in the area, and little by little, I just built it up where they were starting to reach out to me when they had new tournaments coming up. Can you provide services? And the tournaments got bigger, the events got bigger where I couldn't personally work them anymore. I needed to hire 4 or 5 athletic trainers and place them at these different sites on the weekends, soccer tournaments, 4 to 5 different locations. And it just started growing from there.
So you actually wound up building a business of other athletic trainers as well?
Yeah, so as my story goes, yeah, at the beginning it was just me hustling and personally working those events.
Yeah.
And now I've grown it to the point where I have my clients in tournaments and I don't physically work those events and I place the athletic trainers at those tournaments. So I built my network of athletic trainers and clients of tournaments and coaches and I place them at all different events, tournaments throughout New York City, Long Island.
That is really cool. Is that something that you plan on, like, is that infinitely scalable? Not infinitely, but is that something that you plan to keep growing? Like, is it something, I guess, what are the steps? Is it to find the athletic trainers? Is there more demand than there is supply? Where's the constraint right now, ultimately?
Yeah, there's a lot of hoops to jump through to get a certified athletic trainer. And the quantity that these tournaments need, if you have a bigger tournament that needs 4 or 5 on the weekend, they need a specific network of athletic trainers that are going to be available. So I've built that up where I know who could work for me and who's available on those weekends. Most of those athletic trainers already have full-time jobs, so they're also doing their own side hustle too, covering extra events. So I know who wants to, hustle a little bit and do some extra events, and they've been reaching out to me and I've been able to build it up so far.
Huh. That's really neat. So, right, in essence, you're doing all the logistical work and then just taking a percentage, but not actually physically working on site. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear all these different side hustles and like how people how they evolve. Because I don't think I don't want to put words in your mouth, but probably when you first started, I don't know that like you envision yourself not being on the field, but yet here you are, and it's still going 10 plus years later.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't imagine it to be like this, and it's very cool that I'm able to basically stay at home for the most part and place these athletic trainers. And it's rewarding because you want an athletic trainer at all these. There's too many sporting events going on. There's no medical professional. There's concussions. There are different injuries, and there's no one there to say that this kid can't go back in the game. It's dangerous if they go back in the game. So it's very rewarding that no, I'm keeping these kids safe throughout the community, placing these athletic trainers, and I love it. It's not always so easy. I've had athletic trainers call out last second. So if they call out, I have to go to the event and cover what they weren't able to do. So I have to be willing and able to put down my plans when something happens and work also. So there's ups and downs, but I do truly enjoy it.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I think anybody who manages people knows it's not always the easiest thing in the world, but yeah, it's just cool to have that flexibility. And then again, you've built this network and you've built connections and you've built relationships with different events. And yeah, I mean, if you can provide and help people, I think back to like the wild, wild west days when I was a kid and like, how many kids went back onto a soccer field with a concussion or something. Like it's crazy. So
Exactly.
it's nice to see it really mature to the point where health is so important. So yeah, that's really neat. Because I guess let's talk about cost of living. Because like you said, you're in Queens, so it's not, for anybody who knows New York City, it's clearly not Manhattan, but it's also clearly not a low cost of living area by any stretch. How much does your life cost roughly? Like, do you have a sense of what the breakdown is? I'm not sure if you're still in an apartment that costs $900 a month or whatnot, but like, talk us through like what does life look like for Chris in terms of annual budget?
I've never been a super strict budgeter. I was always good with saving, and it just came natural to me. I knew I was making more and saving more, and I wasn't spending it as much. I knew if I was filling up my buckets, if my Roth IRA was fully covered, my 403b, my 457, and I had a little extra to contribute every month to my individual brokerage, then I was okay. I don't live in that apartment anymore. I'm in a house now, still renting. That's another whole topic because New York City
Oh,
cost of purchasing is a little crazy and almost makes more sense for me personally to rent this house that I live here in Queens as opposed to paying for a mortgage. But yeah, no strict budgeting, just maxing out those retirement accounts, making sure, I'm getting all those buckets filled and whatever's left I have to spend.
oh, I like that. So yeah, it's like a reverse, just pay yourself first. And listen, if you're maxing out all those things and you're putting money into a taxable brokerage, you're obviously doing okay, as evidenced by the $1 million net worth. So yeah, sounds like sounds like you have it figured out. But let's talk about the housing because you said, I don't want to parse your words, but something to the effect of like it almost makes more sense for me to rent. And I'm in my head, I'm screaming like it probably definitively makes more sense. And I'm sure you know that. And I can see the smile on your face. I think what I'd love to talk about is like as we've discussed here before, like the cult of homeownership. I think Chrissy and Bryce have been on the show from Millennial Revolution talking about that. And like I think most people reflexively think it's an absolute slam dunk. Owning is better than renting. But that's not always the case by any means. And there's a lot of factors. And I would love to dispel that myth that it really is just very personal. Could you talk through, like, did you think about that on just like a quantitative basis? Like, is this purely numbers? Is it lifestyle? Is it flexibility? Like, talk us through that because this is something we've touched on a handful of times, but just not enough here on the podcast. And I'd love to hear just another perspective.
So specifically for Queens, the cost of living is pretty insane. The house that 3 houses down from where I live now, the house is on sale for 1.2 million. And it's the same exact size of a house that I'm currently renting, same exact everything. I
Huh.
actually went and checked it out, and I currently pay 3,700 now for where I live in this house. So if I ran the numbers, I think, despite putting down over 200K to get 20% down on that $1.2 million house with the taxes and then the mortgage, I was looking at, I think it was almost $8,000 a month of a mortgage payment. Yeah, something like that, close to
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
compared to the 3,700 I'm paying in rent. And again, if something breaks here, I call the landlord and he has to come fix it. I don't have to worry about extra, unexpected expenses. That flexibility you talked about, I didn't really want to buy a house unless I was in love with it. I see houses here in New York City they're over $1 million, and I was like, I don't even want to live here. It's not even that nice.
Yeah.
So why would I tie myself down to something I'm not really in love with? And it didn't financially make sense. Taking that extra money that I don't have to pay in a mortgage and investing that money has, I think has done really well for myself.
Yeah, that's super cool. I like to almost invert the problem and look at it in terms of the rental property owner, right? So we talk about the 1% rule, which thanks to our friends from Bigger Pockets. So essentially, if you take 1% of the purchase price, that is theoretically what you should get in monthly rent to make it a reasonable investment. And I'm gonna take a minute or two here because this is super important. So 1% of 1.2 million is $12,000. So $12,000 a month and you're paying 3,700, right? So that's 0.3%. Now, again, going to the rental at that 1% rule, that sounds insane for a lot of people. Like, how could I possibly get that? Right. Like the owner of your place is like, there's no world where I can get $12,000 a month. But when you think about that, getting 1% per month is a 12% gross return, right? So just simply 1 times 12 for the 12 months, so you annualize it. That's a 12% gross return. And also, our friends at Bigger Pockets have the back of the envelope of 50% rule, which is roughly 50% of what you bring in goes out the door for expenses in terms of property management or real estate taxes or et cetera, insurance, all that stuff. But again, back of the envelope, doesn't hold true. But that again, that's a 6% net return. So for all that, even if you found this 1 in a million 1% rule, you're only getting a 6% net return. So everybody who's screaming from the rooftops of how amazing rental real estate is, it's a great investment, but it's as good as anything else essentially. And there's lots of negatives, but you're paying a third of that or a little less than a third of that, right? So I mean, your landlord is maybe scraping by at a 2% return on that. Now, obviously, there's appreciation, which is on top. But yeah, I mean, Chris, to me, it sounds like you're winning there pretty, pretty handily.
Yeah, yeah, we're happy in the situation that we have. The flexibility is great. I'm not opposed to home ownership. It's just the way things are right now in New York City. It just doesn't seem, when you run the numbers, the right thing to do financially.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. So, talk me through about other keys to success. I know before we jumped on, like you mentioned that, and we talked about this earlier, like frugality is not a dirty word. Talk me through areas where maybe you're still and loudly frugal and proudly frugal, I should say, and maybe areas where you've loosened the purse strings a little bit. I'd love to hear just like if there has been an evolution, which I don't know if there has been, but talk me through frugality and any evolution.
Frugality is definitely important to me. Since I've crossed that 1 million net worth, I try to lighten up a little bit and spend money on things that I enjoy. A good example of how I do that and still am a little bit frugal. I'm a big Knicks fan,
Nice.
and we're going to a lot of Knicks games recently. They're doing really well, and now we're paying more money for those better seats. Being closer to the game, seeing the coaches and the players talking, that's providing value, and I really enjoy that and love that. At the same token, I'm going to Madison Square Garden. I make sure I bring an empty water bottle because I'm not going to go in there and pay $8 for a bottle of water. I'm going to go fill it up in the water fountain. So I will spend money for those closer seats, but I'm still frugal in ways that I don't want to kind of, I guess, get ripped off and pay $8 or $9 for a bottle of water.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny. We're like the same person, I think. This is exactly how I think too. Like, I have no issue spending on experiences, but yet I'm the same way. Like, it would kill me to order like a full meal and like a beer or something at the game when it feels like getting ripped off. And I don't think that's contradictory. I think some of like frugality haters on the internet or would say, like, oh, you guys are just pinching pennies. And like, honestly, it's not that. Like, I came on this podcast and said I've spent a whole lot of money on concerts in the last year on Taylor Swift, and I saw Bono in New York City. And I mean, believe me, I did not save a boatload of money on those tickets. Like, they were very expensive, but yet I still think it's consistent and defensible to not want to frivolously waste money. And it's the same with your $8 water. Like, yeah, when I go to an amusement park, I go to amusement parks now with my daughter all the time. Like, I mean, I'm the guy who in my backpack pulls out a couple of peanut butter sandwiches and a couple of protein bars. And I have no problem with that. Like, again, I don't think I'm going out of my way to be cheap. I'm spending where I think it makes sense. Like, I'm spending a lot of money on the trip to go to Texas with my daughter to go to 3 amusement parks. But Chris, I got to tell you, I mean, I'm still going to bring my peanut butter sandwiches and protein bars. And I think to me, that's fun. It's like part of the game.
It's definitely part of it. I don't see it changing if my net worth was 2 million or 3 million. It's just part of who you are.
Yeah, I hear you.
So, speaking of frugality, one thing I just thought of is just the power of researching. I came out of college with my first job making $38,000 a year. I was working full time as an athletic trainer, and I was working nights and weekends, and I knew I couldn't hold this up long term. I knew I had to go back to school for something. I bounced the ideas of physical therapy school, physician assistant, and teaching. And through research at the time, I came across this program that they had a shortage of math and science teachers in New York City. And if you were willing to join this program, they would give you a $30,000 stipend and a full scholarship for the whole entire master's degree. When I first read it, I thought this is a joke, or I possibly can't qualify for this because I don't have any kind of teaching background. I thought to myself, I have a strong athletic training background. I took a lot of science classes in college. Let's just see what happens. So, just taking that risk, reaching out to them, I sent them my transcript, and sure enough, they said, "You're very close to becoming a science teacher. You have all these chemistry credits and physics from your athletic training background. You need to take a couple more online classes." And they accepted me into the program. So, I
Wow.
catapulted right into it. The program was a 1 year fast paced program. So, we took classes fall, spring, winter, and summer, no break. In turn for that, they gave us the $30,000 stipend because that was supposed to support us because we weren't really able to work for that year. And after that, they got us right into a school teaching. The only catch to this was I had to work in a high needs New York City school for 3 years. That allowed me to retain my scholarship and the $30,000 stipend. After working those 3 years at a high needs New York City school, you could basically branch off and do whatever you want from there. And just another thing that kind of catapulted me and kept the ball rolling on my investing and saving, not coming out of school in debt, etc.
Yeah, that's amazing. Is there, just for anybody who might be interested, is there a name for the program? Does it still exist?
I don't think it still exists. They changed the name. There's teaching fellows and things like that. At the time, my program was called Spiritas. I don't believe it's under that name anymore, but just look up. There's usually shortages in specifically science and math, and then New York City is trying to recruit those kind of teachers, and you never know what's out there.
Yeah, that is cool. And it's interesting that you mentioned teaching fellows because that's what my brother actually did. So he went through the New York City Teaching Fellows program, and yeah, he came out as a math teacher, and he didn't major in math, but he had a strong background, and it just worked out incredibly well. And then yeah, we actually had him on the podcast years ago, back at the beginning of 2019, talking about exploring international teaching opportunities, which is just like a cool springboard for where he took this. He took it from a psychology degree to being a math teacher, a really excellent one, and then traveling the world teaching. You just never know where life is going to take you. So I'm curious. I know, or at least I know of teachers on Long Island, which obviously is a different school system, or yeah, every school district is different, but certainly different than the New York City school system. But the salaries are pretty reasonable, certainly for as compared to in a lot of areas of the country for school teachers. But really the pension is something that is really alluring for a lot of people. I know friends who are teachers on Long Island, and it's a significant thing. I'm curious how you think about a potential pension and the intersection of maybe a FI life. I don't know if teaching is just a passion and you plan on working there forever, regardless of whether you've hit FI, or how you think about, hey, there's this potential pension, but I have to work X number of additional years. In your case, it's probably at least another 15 plus years at this point.
They call a pension the golden handcuffs,
Yeah.
and I try not to think about it too much because there's too many teachers out there that are, I want to say, not happy, but they're sticking it out just to get that pension, and they're staying locked into that profession. So that's another reason I kind of chase FI and build my own net worth so I don't have to rely on those golden handcuffs. I'm not locked into this job if I'm truly unhappy. If I truly want to explore something else in my life, I'll have that option. The pension's a great thing, but I'm not going to rely on it as my only source of income. I'm going to keep building my net worth. And it's kind of just like icing on top if I get a pension at the end of the day when I reach that age.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a healthy way of looking at it. And it reminds me of how a lot of us in the FI community think about Social Security. And we've talked about this in the last couple of months, where, I mean, I think almost under any circumstance, we're probably going to have minimum 70% of the anticipated benefits. Again, we can never foretell the future. I'm not promising this, but I think that's what a lot of experts suggest, that it's going to be at minimum 70% of what you expect. But I mean, Chris, you know this as well as I do. Most people in the FI community don't factor in Social Security into their FI number. They just don't. And that's probably silly. It's probably ultra conservative, but it is what it is. And I think in your case, it's probably even healthier what you're doing is, hey, I'm not locking myself into this. I'm not looking at this as a golden handcuffs or golden albatross, right? As from our friend Grumpus Maximus, who we had on the show way back when, episode 57 and 227. And he wrote a great book called The Golden Albatross: How to Determine If Your Pension is Worth It. And I think for anybody who has a potential pension, that's a really interesting book to check out. So we'll link to that in the show notes. But yeah, I mean, listen, if you don't need it, you're going to get to FI. And hey, if life happens that you stay for those number of years and you get this pension, then great. It's icing on top of the cake. But it doesn't sound like you're going to orient your life decisions around it. Is that a pretty fair summation?
Exactly. Yep. Not letting it kind of run me. And if it's there for me at the end, then it is. But I'm still going to build my own portfolio and chase my own dreams.
Yeah, hell yeah. Good for you, man. That's really cool. So, yeah, I mean, where do your dreams take you? I mean, you're killing it, right? Like, I mean, I don't
Thank
want to
you.
state the obvious here, but I mean, you are, from what I can read from that Facebook post, you're maxing out all of these accounts that you talked about. You're maxing out 403B, 457B, Roth IRA. I think you have access to a SEP IRA also from your side hustle and are either maxing that out or certainly contributing significantly. You've grown this net worth from in under 10 years to a really significant amount. What's next on your FI journey?
That's the beautiful thing. You don't really know, but chasing FI gives you that flexibility that you could do what you want when the time comes. I don't know what's going to bring me passion 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I don't know who I'm going to network with athletic training. Maybe the New York Knicks are going to call. We just don't know. But FI is just so important because it just gives you that flexibility to chase your dreams, follow your passions. You're not locked down to one area.
Yeah, Chris, I think you covered it, right? It's freedom and flexibility. That is the essence of why most of us pursue FI. It gives us options that we just simply don't have, right? Like so many of us are bogged down in the day to day. We live paycheck to paycheck. We can't ever think about leaving our job willingly, right? Or doing something different. If, like you said, if the Knicks came calling your team, right? It almost, I suspect, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it almost wouldn't even matter what the number is that they offered you.
You're 100% correct.
Right. And like, that's what's so cool about, hey, it was, again, hard choices, easy life, where I don't think you've lived a life of deprivation. I don't think you'd internalize it like that at all. But I mean, you did something remarkable. You saved all this money. And at a pretty young age, you have a $1 million plus net worth. And now you have options to do essentially whatever you want in life. And it might mean you keep on doing what you're doing for the next 5, 10, 20 years because you choose to do it. But it's coming from a place of choice. And I think that is the FI story encapsulated. So it's just a beautiful thing. I really want to thank you for coming on. I think this has been really interesting. And I guess where I'd love for you to leave us is I know you co-authored a book that help New York City teachers understand how to maximize finances and retirement. And I guess another hope from this episode is that the teachers and public service workers understand that, hey, here's another example of we're not behind. We actually have access to some things that put us ahead of the game. So, talk to me about the book. Where can people find it? And maybe any last parting words for other people like you in similar jobs all across the country.
Yeah, the book is titled TLDR Financial Literacy for New York City Teachers. So it stands for Too Long Didn't Read. And Carl's the main author. He authored over 20 books. He's trying to get a book for almost every state for teachers specifically, trying to give them, it's about a 2 hour quick read, just breaking down what they have access to financially to invest in, to save, and their pension, etc. So I think it's a great purchase. You could find it on Amazon. It's $9 for the hard copy, I think $5 for the digital version. So a great investment if you are a teacher, if you have a family member who's a teacher. I highly recommend seeing if you have one of those books for their state that they're in, if they're not in New York City also.
Yeah, that's really cool. So we will link that in the show notes. And like you said, your co-author is Carl Fish, and he has produced at least 20 of these books. And I guess you can find the trail really easily, probably 2 clicks on Amazon. So you would click through the show notes to the book. Obviously, not everybody's in New York City, but then just click on his author page and it'll show you the list of books that he has. And it sounds like he's adding to that. So yeah, I mean, this is just yet another resource for teachers. And I mean, you guys do just incredibly important work. And I just, I hate the narrative that teachers are at such a disadvantage. And listen, I mean, in a lot of districts across the country and across the world, teachers I wish could be paid more. So we're not saying like it's rainbows and unicorns for everybody, but there are some really positive options. And I think the more that we talk about this and share stories like yours, the more that news can get out there. So yeah, Chris, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. Is there, other than the book, is there a way that people can reach out to you or learn more?
Yeah, I am on Instagram. My name is Wealthy Educator. You can reach out to me there.
Nice. I like it. Wealthy educator. That's beautiful. All right. Until next time, thank you for listening to ChooseFI. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me.